On today's show, the Capitals want to get better this offseason, but better where? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Capitals want to get better. And you might be thinking to yourself, better where? They won the Metro. They won the Eastern Conference. But what really got drawn into focus in this playoffs this past season was that the Capitals struggled in the second round against a team like the Carolina Hurricanes. How do they build this team better so they can compete with the likes of the Carolina Hurricanes? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about Aaron Ekblad as an option. The Capitals do want to address their blue line. All things considered, John Carlson is aging, and they're looking for an upgrade. Would Aaron Ekblad be a good option? A bit later, I'll talk about another intriguing name in a forward in Brock Boeser. The Capitals want to improve their forward line combos. Would Brock Boeser be a good improvement? But just to get it going here, we're going to talk about one big name that is due to be a free agent this summer, and that is Sam Bennett. And I know that I'm already going to hear like, are you crazy, Dan? Or the Capitals could never acquire the likes of a Sam Bennett or Brock Boeser. Well, listen, in the breakdown day videos and the days that followed, there was an interview with Chris Patrick and Brian MacLellan. And one of the beat writers asked Chris Patrick if the Capitals planned on taking any big hacks, quote unquote, this offseason. And Chris Patrick entertained that idea as this team was good. Of course, we remember what they accomplished, but not good enough. And it seemed like that the Carolina Hurricanes were unbeatable. But what have we noticed in the playoffs that followed? That it seems like the Carolina Hurricanes are going to be setting up tea time rather soon, as the Florida Panthers are dispatching them in short order. So I think the Capitals need to make some upgrades. And in the episodes that follow, I will talk about premier unrestricted free agents or free agents trade value that the Capitals could acquire in order to improve this team. As I don't think there is a lot of, trades or movement that needs to happen, but I think, like I said, what happened in the playoffs this past season exposed some of the weaknesses in areas that could be improved. Now, big picture, 30,000 foot view, this team that we saw last season was not battle tested, and that got drawn into focus. And Dylan Strome even talked about it on breakdown day that many of the players on the roster had never played second round playoff hockey before, and it's different. And it seems like sometimes it's just something you say, but playoff hockey is a completely different animal than regular season hockey, as everything is ratcheted up and you see the very best of the respective teams. I think the Capitals entered into a bit of a fight or flight phase when the Carolina Hurricanes threw the kitchen sink at them. So let's dive into some upgrades. Listen, it is the off season. It is the silly season. So let's get silly and let's not be afraid to dream here a little bit. We'll take a deep look at 3 major names who could hit the open market this summer: Sam Bennett, Brock Boeser, and Aaron Ekblad. What would it take to get one of these big pieces in DC? How would they fit in with the current roster, and who might be on the move to make it all work under the salary cap? So let's get into it. There are some unrestricted free agents on the Capitals that I expect potentially could be on the move. Of course, Lars Eller's in that mix. You got Anthony Beauvillier, Radish, these kind of guys, Mangiapane, that even the players themselves said that this was a really special group, but there's an understanding that it is not going to be that same group into next season. So let's talk about a marquee name, a gritty center that the Capitals could really use, and that is Sam Bennett. And the center position is pretty well buttoned up, I think. If you take a look at it, Dylan Strome first line, Pierre-Luc Dubois second line, and Nick Dowd on the fourth line. The third line, we expect to see the departure of Lars Eller, of course, and that creates a vacancy. And the options there, internal options, are Connor McMichael, Hendrix Lapierre. But if the Capitals wanted to solidify that, would Sam Bennett be the kind of guy, not to play on the third line, but that could mean that perhaps things could get juggled around a little bit. Perhaps Pierre-Luc Dubois could go down to the third line, something to that extent. But what are some of the things we know about line combos anyway? That Nick Dowd in that fourth line hold that title of fourth line, but that's not a disparaging thing. Sometimes the fourth line for the Capitals is the biggest producer. So even if it meant a shakeup on the third line, that would be the case. But Sam Bennett has long been one of those quote-unquote glue guys who doesn't always show up in the headlines, but makes a huge impact in the postseason. And that is what the Capitals sorely need, is postseason performers. And the current roster as is does not have a lot of postseason performers. And still a bit on the younger side at 29. He's in the prime and coming off several strong playoff runs with the Florida Panthers. And that is a team that knows how to win hockey games. And that is a team that knows how to win postseason hockey games under some really great leadership there. Paul Maurice is the guy that's pushing the buttons, pulling the strings, and gets the absolute most out of his players. As far as Sam Bennett, he's the kind of forward who scores clutch goals, kills penalties, plays with a physical snarl, and can swing momentum with a big hit or a smart defensive play. And that's what I'm talking about. I think that if I was going to slot him in, I would slot him in at that second line center position. And I think he could be a true game changer. Could you just picture that right now? If we want to pencil it in, Strome first line center, Bennett second line, Pierre-Luc Dubois third, and Nick Dowd fourth line center. That would be quite a force to be reckoned with. And Bennett isn't just a third line guy. He's a true middle six weapon. If Florida lets him walk due to cap constraints, Bennett becomes one of the most sought after centers under 30 in the league. And, he could, I have him penciled in. If the Capitals acquired him, say they swing for the fences and connect, I think he could be a good second line center. But it's going to be a battle in camp if a player of that caliber is acquired. Now, the Capitals currently have run out Dylan Strome, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and we saw Eller, and I think that Connor McMichael, like I said, is going to be in that mix as their primary centers. Strome is the most offensively productive. So I think that that first line center is safe, and Dubois adds size and strength down the middle. And, like I said, Lars Eller didn't work, but McMichael continues to evolve. He is another option at the center position. Adding Bennett to that mix gives the Capitals an elite 4 center setup, a luxury in today's NHL. And if you take a look at it, the Capitals are not, too far away from being a team that can really take it deep and perhaps even win another Stanley Cup. I think if you add a guy like Sam Bennett to the mix, that could be an absolute game changer. But the real fit might be moving Bennett into the third line center spot, I think is a possibility as well, in shifting McMichael to the wing. That is another scenario that I thought of. And I know that Connor McMichael likes to play center, but we saw great production from him at that second line wing position. So that would be interesting. That's where he's looked more comfortable at times. A line of Sam Bennett, Connor McMichael, and Brandon Duhaime could be one of the better third lines in the league. Fast, physical, responsible defensively, and still able to chip in offensively. So that would be an intriguing storyline to follow. If you added a guy like Sam Bennett to the mix, Connor McMichael has the flexibility that he could play center or wing. I'm running possible scenarios here. Again, I've talked about scenarios where I could see him fitting in on the second line. I could also see him fitting in on the third line and just let the cards kind of fall where they may. Again, I'm talking to you about next season. If we think to the moves that were made last summer when the Capitals brought in Pierre-Luc Dubois, I kind of initially had him pegged in at the first line center position. But I think if the Capitals could acquire someone like a Sam Bennett, they would find a way to fit him in. Now, the financial considerations are what's going to be difficult. I think the Capitals have one big hack in their salary cap, and not a whole lot more than that. So, signing Bennett won't come cheap. Early projections suggest $7 to $8 million per season, depending on the term. The Capitals would need to clear cap space to make it work. That likely means moving on from depth defensemen like Trevor Van Riemsdyk, or examining whether a younger, cheaper internal option like Alexander Ovechkin could be more responsible. And those are the moves if they acquire him before the trade deadline. It all changes, if the Capitals are willing to open up the piggy bank on July 1st to accommodate that. But another possibility, letting pending free agents go on the team that we don't think are going to be a part of the long-term answer. I think that, a player like Anthony Beauvillier and Andrew Mangiapane are good players. I mean, good. I mean, nothing to say. There's nothing too flashy. There's nothing too negative about them. But would I be willing to move on from those kind of players to get a really great player? Absolutely. So that's an interesting scenario to look at as well. But Bennett as a playoff difference maker, because that's exactly what he has been for Florida, is an absolute game changer for that team. So, again, this is the silly season. This is the summer. This is where I go to dream. My dream team that I could create for the Capitals. So it is going to be interesting to see what kind of big hacks that Chris Patrick, Brian MacLellan, and the Capitals take. But I think that an upgrade, a big-time upgrade at the center position, could be exactly what the doctor ordered. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about another intriguing forward in Brock Boeser. Would he be a good fit for the Capitals? I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever check your banking account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And you take a look at it, the economy is a bit in flux right now, and it's good to save where you can. I take a look at dining out. I try to eliminate that. I try to eat at home as much as I possibly can, because I want to make my dollar go as far as you can. And with the experts at Monarch Money, it really helps. Now, you take a look at it, like I mentioned, eating out, trying to eliminate that. Instead of juggling multiple apps, which can be confusing, you can use Monarch to check your finances. You can also track your spending and even plan long-term goals. Now, the cool thing is if you are married or have a significant other, you can track spending between your significant other. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. And listen, these financial situations can be most stressful. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this second segment here, we're talking forwards here. In the first segment, I talked about Sam Bennett, but Brock Boeser could be another good upgrade for the Capitals. Another hack, another big swing for the Capitals to improve a team. I think the Capitals have a lot of mid-tier talent. They need some upper echelon, proven performers to take this team to the next level. You take a look at Alex Ovechkin. You take a look at John Carlson. Next year is their final years under contract. The change is staring this team squarely in the face, whether they like it or not. So planning ahead could be a really great option. So let's talk about that in the second segment here. And you take a look at Brock Boeser, and his situation in Vancouver has been very dramatic, to say the least. Despite being one of the team's most consistent scorers, his name has constantly come up as trade rumors. And not the first time that his name has been associated with the Capitals. In fact, I remember doing one of these episodes last summer talking about the fit of Brock Boeser on the Capitals. Now, GM Patrick Allvin even admitted trying to move him before the deadline, but didn't like the return offers. And, you take a look at Vancouver as well as, I think, a team that showed improvement. And I think another team that's not too far away from being a really great Canadian team. You saw a lot of great Canadian teams take things to the next level this postseason, some of them still playing in the postseason. And I think that you could add the Vancouver Canucks to that mix as well. So they are trying to maximize a return as well. Boeser responded with one of the most complete seasons yet, working on his resume to say, hey, teams out there that are looking for an improvement, I'm your guy, hitting the 30-goal mark and showing he still has plenty to give. And, he's a guy that's constantly on my radar. I check in on him from time to time during the regular season. And it's a name that I've heard from a lot of different Capitals fans on Twitter, on YouTube, these kind of things about, hey, why don't the Capitals go after a Brock Boeser? Touche. I hear that. I think he would be a really great option. And still, on the somewhat younger side of things, 28 years old, Brock Boeser is looking for a fresh start. It's not working in Vancouver. And I think the Capitals could offer him a top 6 role right away. And for Brock Boeser, you got to think that he would love something like that. The Capitals are a team that routinely makes it to the playoffs. I know that they have, not made a deep push, since 2018, but I think the makings are there for something huge. Now, you take a look about where these players could fit in. Oftentimes on these podcasts, they'll talk about, the Capitals should be interested in X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to tell you potentially where I could see them fit in. Now, Boeser could line up with Dylan Strome and Tom Wilson, or even play alongside Pierre-Luc Dubois and Ryan Leonard. A Boeser, Dubois, and Leonard line. Could you imagine that? So say, for example, that, Connor McMichael goes to that third line center position. And the question is, who's going to take McMichael's spot on the second line? Imagine Boeser, Dubois, and Leonard. I like that already. That line would be physically dominant and capable of overwhelming opponents down low while creating high danger scoring chances. Huge, so I think that, on paper, it seems like a really great upgrade, especially if Connor McMichael, like I say, is the guy that takes the third line center position. That I think the third line would have a big upgrade as well. I think that there is still other pieces on that line that would need to be addressed as well, especially Mangiapane, these kind of guys, Radish, that McMichael would be one answer. But big picture, it's taking care of the things you can take care of. And if the second line is shut down like Boeser, Dubois, and Leonard, that could be absolutely huge. And Boeser becomes a second shooting option while the Caps desperately need to keep teams from keying solely on Ovi. That they need, more scoring options than, just what it's been historically. I know we saw players put up career numbers this past season, but, Ovi is the guy that year after year puts up the big numbers. If they could add another goal scorer in Brock Boeser, that could be huge. So what would it take? The finances are always where it gets a bit tricky here. Now, financially, Boeser would likely command $6.5 to $7.5 million annually. That's in line with his current deal. To make it work, the Capitals might look at moving a winger like Anthony Beauvillier, who could be a short-term asset. Beauvillier is a capable player, but doesn't have the upside Boeser brings. And, the Capitals do have some flexibility as is, even with the names that are going to be dropping off. Again, I'm just here to tell you that all the players that are on the roster here right now are not going to make it back, whether it's trade or on July 1st that they move on. So, I think they have enough cap space as is, but to say the Capitals did need to move on from a forward, I think that, clearing up some cap space with a guy like Anthony Beauvillier could be one option. And another option is to shop some of the team's defense depth as well. As one of the things that's been said is there is a glut of talent on the blue line. Again, we saw some of that drawn into focus. And in the final segment of this show, I'll talk about another upgrade there that, I talked about Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who did have a good season. But, if you want to get a good player, you're going to have to give up someone. And you could take a look at the options here. Especially young blue liners like Martin Fehérváry and Rasmus Sandin are ready to take it to the next step. Trading a veteran like Matt Roy, who has been a solid value, could also help open up some space. Again, I'm not in love with the idea of moving on from a player like TVR or Matt Roy, but it's big picture that you want to make upgrades where you can and understand that you're going to lose a player perhaps in the process. So it'll all be interesting if they trade for and acquire, or if it goes out to July. I guess it remains to be seen on how these situations play out. But the verdict is Boeser is not just a good fit. He fills a need. He's a 30-goal scorer who doesn't need power play minutes to produce. And the Capitals, that's what they're looking for, is good 5-on-5 scoring. They don't, necessarily need, the guys that can just score on the power play, that kind of thing. So I think that that would give the Capitals a really great option as well. If the Capitals want to contend with retooling, Boeser gives them one of the best chances to upgrade their top six immediately. So definitely things for the Capitals to consider. Again, this is the silly season. This is where we're not afraid of dreaming. And, like I talked about, first segment, Sam Bennett, this second segment, Brock Boeser, 2 upgrades. Again, it depends on if they trade for and acquire, if it goes out to July, what kind of assets and what kind of cap space they would have to clear to accommodate that. But those are intriguing storylines to follow. All right, so coming up here after the break, I'll talk about upgrades on defense, the blue line, the rear guards. If you take a look at it, the Capitals struggled in the playoffs minus Marty Fehérváry. You saw John Carlson in the second round kind of non-existent for the most part, and he's only got 1 year left under contract, so it's not too early to start planning for the future on the Caps blue line. Would Aaron Ekblad be a good upgrade? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the first 2 segments, I talked about options for forwards. I talked about a center. I talked about a wing. Let's talk about defense and how the Capitals could stand to improve their blue line. And you take a look at it, not a lot of weaknesses, at least if you're looking at the regular season. I thought the Capitals blue line stayed healthy, and that was definitely a part of their secret sauce for success. But, what are some of the things that we've seen in years before where, remember John Carlson missed a substantial amount of time and the team was put to test and struggled in that regard. And the Capitals losing Marty Fehérváry in the playoffs this year, I think, had a bigger impact than I thought, many people would have perceived as the feeling out there was that the Capitals blue line was just had so many options. But who was the option? It was Alex Alexiev. And let's just say his play, in my estimation, was a little lackluster. So let's talk about how the Capitals could stand to improve. And Aaron Ekblad is a franchise caliber defenseman worth the gamble. Aaron Ekblad is the kind of defenseman who rarely hits free agency, a former number 1 overall pick. And those guys don't become available too often. He spent his entire career with Florida and played through injuries, suspensions, and everything in between. But what are some of the things I like about the 3 players I mentioned in this episode? All proven playoff performers. So if the Capitals could acquire one of these guys, it would be huge. But Aaron Ekblad, you talk about that, the Panthers' acquisition of Seth Jones at the deadline and Ekblad's upcoming contract expiration creates a perfect storm. And you got to think that Florida, depending on what happens in the playoffs, and even if they don't win the whole thing, win the Stanley Cup, that, players move on. Because once you add the title of Stanley Cup winner, or final round Stanley Cup final, that your value goes up quite a bit. And now the Florida Panthers have proven performers. They have guys that have been there and done that. So all of a sudden their asking value goes up, up, up. And let's be honest, they're only going to be able to keep so many players under the cap. The Panthers may choose to ride with Jones and let Ekblad walk, or they might want to trade him to avoid losing him for nothing. And that is something that I talk about quite often on this show. And, something I was a little disappointed on Backstrom and Oshie is that, they played their last season under contract on the LTIR. Could they have moved them earlier to get some kind of return? So for Backstrom, for Oshie, they got 0. So, you take a look at the Panthers. They would like to return some value for him. It only makes sense. So how would he fit in with the Capitals? The Capitals blue line has talent. You take a look at Carlson, Sandin, Fehérváry, Chychrun, but it lacks a true number 1 shutdown guy. And that is another thing that got drawn into focus in the playoffs. Carlson is aging. And I think if we're honest and we're not just, singing the hits here from Carlson, what we've seen from him in the past, he was non-existent in the playoffs. Chychrun is more offense than he is defense. And Ekblad is the guy and you can throw out there against the top lines late in the game or on the PK. Could be huge for the Capitals. And, you take a look at it to the people that would say, hey, I don't want to touch the blue line. Wasn't good enough when they were put to the test, when one of their major pieces exited the playoffs there, Marty Fehérváry, their option was Alex Alexiev. And they got to have a better option than Alexiev, in my estimation. Ekblad could form an elite pairing with Rasmus, Sandin, or slot next to Fehérváry for a more balanced look. His presence would also allow Carlson to take on more offensive duties and be used more selectively. As we know that Carlson routinely plays 23 plus minutes a night, and he's not getting any younger, that if he could take on a more limited role, I think that would be advantageous for number 74 and the Capitals. So what would it take? Here is where it gets a little bit tricky. That's the common theme this time of year is I want this player and that player and that player, but this is not Major League Baseball. This is the National Hockey League, and this is all going to have to come under budget. If Ekblad hits free agency, he'll cost north of $8 million annually. If he's traded, Florida will want either a high-end prospect, whoever that might be. You think of high-end names on the Capitals, or a top young NHLer like Sandin. So that would be the difficult part. So I don't think the Capitals, you take a look at their upper echelon players. I don't know if the Capitals would want to part with a Leonard, Miroshnichenko, or a guy like Sandin. But with that said, if you're looking for an upgrade, you're going to have to give up a big piece. Of course, I would avoid moving on from a player like Leonard or Miroshnichenko at all costs. With that said, though, the Capitals would have to give up a bigger piece if it meant a trade. or, again, these are all scenarios. Or if it went out to July and they just signed him straight up, that would cost a lot of money. Again, you'd have to move some players, most likely to come under budget. The Capitals do have some money to spend, like I said, but if you take one big hack, that's going to limit, where you're going to be able to address other unrestricted free agents and, positions of need on the team. So all things to consider. Now, the Capitals could try to negotiate a sign and trade, but they'd have to be aggressive. It might mean parting ways with multiple assets, or perhaps a first-round pick, or, a depth blue liner. Think of like an Alex Alexiev, a Vinny Iorio, something of that nature. But Ekblad is worth the risk if they view him as the next cornerstone of the franchise's blue line. And they're looking for that, as they have guys that ostensibly could be those guys, but ostensibly not proven, right? You take a look at it, that we've heard it's going to be Vinny Iorio's year for quite a while, and there's guys within the organization that are looking for a bigger opportunity, and Hershey is going to have an influx of players that is going to give the Capitals options in years to come. We need a proven performer next year, preferably, because we know Carlson is not going to be here for much longer. And not only that, it's Alex Ovechkin's last season under his current contract next season. Let's give him the absolute best opportunity to win a cup. Wouldn't that be a nice cherry on top for his NHL career? Is catching, passing Gretzky, and winning another cup with this team. I think that would be great. And I don't think the Capitals are a long way away from improving where they're at, but big picture impact. Adding Ekblad would be a power move, the kind of signal that says the team is going for it, not rebuilding. I think that to be considered a serious contender, that's the kind of moves they're going to have to make. You take a look at the teams that are flailing out there, they're going to try to make big moves as well. I would expect, the Penguins to try to be aggressive. I would expect the Islanders under new leadership to be very aggressive. That if the Capitals historically have been aggressive, and I, 9 times out of 10 sing the praises of, former GM Brian MacLellan and Chris Patrick. I think Chris Patrick needs to make a stamp on this organization and sign a really big name player. I know we saw the extension of Logan Thompson and Chychrun, but bringing in a premier talent like one of the players I listed in this episode could be an absolute game changer for a Capitals team trying to strike a balance between competing now and building for the future. You take a look at it, he is a transformative player. So let's get serious and, let's just see what options there are out there. Now, that is going to be the theme here, depending on what kind of news breaks around the organization, is to talk about big names, big swings, big hacks that they used, the term they used, that the Capitals could take. Would Bennett, Boeser, or Ekblad be an option, or is it just silly? I guess time will only tell. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.